over zero trust. What is zero trust? What led to zero trust? And how you can leverage zero trust to build and implement your IT systems. So you can pretty much go ahead and manage resources across your organization. Quick introductions on our side here. Okta is the leading cloud solution for identity and access management. We were founded in 2009. We have over 15,000 customers worldwide. Our main goal or mission is to help connect people to technology securely and simultaneously helps companies to be more productive and secure. Thank you for the introduction, Mark. I'm solution engineer for the alliances team at Okta. I'm based in Boston area, so happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. And then just a quick background on myself. So I originally started as an application engineer for an API software company, and then moved to Synopsys, where I was a senior sales engineer for software security tools. So anyone familiar with SaaS and DaaS applications, those were the main solutions that I was working on. Let's get started with the Zero Trust presentation. So before we jump into the Zero Trust presentation, just a quick rundown on what led to Zero Trust. So perimeter was essentially, the network perimeter was the main control plane model that most organizations or traditional organizations followed, where network perimeters could be of firewall, VPN. So all of this sort of resources within this perimeter were considered as secure and accessed securely. And anyone trying to access from external to this internal perimeter was supposed to be untrusted. So one of the main design flaw with this is that anything within the trusted perimeter, once you breach through that, it's pretty much like a single point of failure. And especially with the breaches with the credentials stolen, credentials was one of the reasons why it was wise to move away from a single perimeter or network perimeter as the only control plane for your security itself. So one of the reasons for moving away was this was not a model that can be depended on. It was pretty much like a single point of failure. It is easy to gain access and compromise all of the resources and databases and applications that you have within your trusted network once you breach through or penetrate through this network perimeter. Now, other reason is, as suggested on the slide, it's cloud and mobile have also dissolved the network perimeter. So legacy or old infrastructure used to be on premises. So all of your applications were dedicated on premises. But now the resources have evolved with the digital explosion in the past 15 years. We have infrastructure as a service. So we have cloud servers on AWS, on Azure. We do have on-premises servers as well. Besides this, we also have cloud applications. Our day-to-day tasks, we pretty much depend on Slack, Zoom. So these are different cloud applications that we pretty much require for performing our day-to-day tasks, apart from the on-premises application. So definitely network perimeter was not feasible. In addition to this, there are also APIs have evolved. So there is public APIs and private APIs, and there needs to be security managed across these APIs as well. Besides that, the way the users were accessing the resources has also evolved. So there are different set of identities that are available now. So there is employees, there's contractors, there's partners, and these identities or these users are accessing these resources pretty much from any location. So they're not tied to a specific location to access these resources. Besides that, the levels of access are vary. So employees definitely have access to more resources than contractors and partners, or even customers. So customers also have access to certain resources wherever the business has an interface. Besides this, within the employees itself, you need to make sure that an admin has highest access privileges compared to a regular employee. So all of these reasons is the reason why network perimeter was dissolved, and we decided to move in a zero trust strategy or implement zero trust strategy. Identity was pretty much the foundational as well as the key starting point for zero trust journey. And the reason being that identity is leveraged by organization to manage resources across infrastructure, application, as well as APIs. So identity is key, and people are essentially our new perimeters. and identity becomes the foundation of zero trust strategy here. So in today's world where you have mobile and people working pretty much from anywhere, identity is pretty much key, and you need to protect the identity, or securing the identity is essentially key for unlocking zero trust strategy. Now, what is zero trust essentially? Zero trust is pretty much based on three main principles here. The first one is always verify, never trust. So all of the resources must be accessed in a secure manner. The second principle is always follow the least privilege access. So for example, if you have an employee who is never really updating anything on this resource, or is never really editing or adding anything to this resource, always provide the least privilege, which is read access for those for any task that needs to be done. Besides this, the third principle here is the organization must always access the incoming and outgoing logs as well as traffic. So monitoring is key, and also verify whether your employees are taking the right steps or are doing the right things. So you have policies defined accordingly so that they will do the right things. Let me know if so far this makes sense. And this is just an announcement that we have. So the Cloud Security Alliance, which essentially manages secure certification and best practices around secure cloud computing environment, has launched Zero Trust Advancement Center. Okta, along with CrowdStrike and Zscaler, are also part of it. With CrowdStrike also released a report, Global Threat Report this year, which highlighted that 80% of the breaches were mainly with identity, was compromised for either credentials or for gaining or evading detection within the organization network. So securing your identity is something that is really crucial for zero trust strategy. Now, what zero trust strategy essentially looks like in practice, and this is pretty much journey across identity for either for a workforce scenario where you have employees, partners, contractors accessing the resource, or even for a customer focused scenario. So you want essentially the right people to have right level of access to the right resources in the right context. And this access has to be evaluated and assessed continuously. While providing this access, or while providing or granting access across these resources, you want to provide least possible friction while providing the highest level of security. You don't really want like the security, adding zero trust security as something to be a hindrance for customers or consumers to adapt. So you need to make sure that you're smart when it comes to, you have a right balance when it comes to security and managing friction. All right. In the previous slide, if you notice, it's right people, right level of access, right resources, and within the right context. Now, what is a context? So in order to gain access, you need to have trust. In order to gain trust, you need to provide context around your authentication. So anytime there's a request coming in, you can define policies around context where you can leverage context, all of the context information that you gain from this incoming request. And what you can do is you can evaluate the response, contextual response that you would like to provide. Now, there are different types of resource context here. The first type of resource context is essentially the resource or an identity. So resource and user context are essentially static. And then there are behavioral contexts or more adaptive contexts, which are network, device, and location, which are dynamic and which may vary based on where the users log in from, which network the users log in from, as well as the device. So when it comes to resource context, you can define policies so that you are evaluating what type of resource is it? Is it a high level? Is it like a high risk profile resource, or is it a low risk profile resource? Is this resource something related to like infrastructure where you have providing access to your critical infrastructure, could be production or dev servers? Or is it like a low risk task manager application that you have on your end? Who is accessing this resource? Whenever there's an incoming request, you can check who is this user. Is he part of the high risk user group? Does he have to provide any additional authentication or any additional MFA or any additional trust to gain access across for the resource that is being requested? Is this user an administrator who could be a target for all of the attackers or bad actors out there? So you need to make sure that these resource as well as identity context are mapped across policy when you're building adaptive policies, as well as you also have to evaluate the dynamic risk levels here. So where is this request coming in from? Is it from a new IP or is it from the same exact IP where the user usually logs in from? What's the device context? Is this device something that is trusted? Is it registered? If you have scenarios where you leverage MDM, where you have managed devices and registered devices, and if there is an alert that this device is jailbroken, what are the steps are you taking in terms of the contextual response? Besides this, location also is key in essentially evaluating the risk signal. For example, there could be someone who is logging in with like an impossible travel situation where he logs in from New York at around 10 a.m. and also logs in at 2 p.m. in on East Coast. And this is something like an impossible travel situation here. So how are you managing those login policies? So you're pretty much creating like a context around each and every login, and then you're evaluating that context in order to grant access. And you can decide how you want to manage, whether you want to allow access, like if it's something that this is the regular user you have who logs in every day at 10 a.m. From the same device, for the same application, then you can go ahead and allow access. You can deny access in case of it's a jailbroken device where this device cannot be trusted. You can block transactions from your application to this device. You can also prompt for a second factor authentication. So if you want to gain more trust, if you want to evaluate whether this user is what he claims to be, you can add like a biometric second factor there, as well as you can go ahead and enable passwordless authentications. There are different ways of handling the user's login or authentication or authorization based on the context that is provided. So let me know if this so far makes sense. All right, so this is like a very busy slide, but let me break it down for you. So there is Okta Zero Trust Control Plane. We pretty much have the resources. So the resources could be, again, like SaaS-based applications, which are listed here. So you can have Slack. We have Okta Integration Network, with which you can integrate with Box, Slack, ServiceNow, Atlassian. And this could be your cloud-based resources. And then you can also have on-premises resources, where you can manage access across with Access Gateway. Besides this, you can also have infrastructure as resources. So you can pretty much provide role-based access across on your critical infrastructure. Could be a Windows or a Linux server where you can RDP or SSH in. Besides this, at the bottom here, these are all the contexts that can be captured. So in Zero Trust, essentially, it's dynamic policy evaluation. So every time there's a logging and coming in, you dynamically evaluate the policy for all of the context data that you have. And based on that, you can make a decision of granting the access or denying it. And you only provide access to the specific resource requested with that request. So at the bottom here, if you have integration with any MDM, which is mobile device management, we can actually check the device posture. We can contribute that as one of the factors when evaluating policy across for that device or incoming requests. You can also evaluate the state of the device. For SDP, which is Session Description Protocol, you can check the logical network perimeters. If you are evaluating EDR, which is endpoint detection response, you can actually check whether this client request can be trusted or not. And again, in Okta, we pretty much manage where the heart of the Zero Trust is essentially the centralized control plane, where we have all of the policies defined. And the key to this control plane is the identity. So every login that occurs on the Okta platform, we pretty much leverage the adaptive authentication policies, where you can have network, device, location, behavior, all of these Okta threat inside basically evaluates these signals, as well as we also have our own machine learning with Okta Threat Insight, where we gather data from all of the customers, and it's basically an anomaly detection algorithm where if there's any company or organization which is undergoing any kind of DDoS attack or credential stuffing or password spraying, then that organization itself, the mode goes from normal to under attack. And then anytime any request that organization is facing, if that any other request comes to any other organization with the same IP, then you can actually add additional authentication on top of it. You also have an option to block that request. So this is pretty much the Okta zero trust control plane. Wanted to keep it brief there, but any questions? All right, so so far what we have covered is what is zero trust, what led to zero trust, how you can, and now we'll go over how you can leverage zero trust. So modern security, or essentially to apply zero trust itself, you need to make some architecture changes. You don't really have to attain zero trust overnight. You can divide that in infrastructure stages. So the first stage here itself, and the main goal for zero trust is, again, always verify, never trust. And you want to essentially provide right people, have right level of access across right resources in the right context. And you want this access to be evaluated continuously. So the first stage here is the fragmented identity. And fragmented identity could be an organization which is essentially in a stage where they do not have a centralized identity for managing their logins across an on-premises application or across on a cloud base. So what happens in this scenario is the user typically has 30 to 40 passwords. He's probably also reusing those passwords. He's probably shared passwords across. Or this situation could also exist in a scenario where you have mergers and acquisitions where some of the users are leveraging LDAP, some of the users are leveraging Active Directory, and then you have these whole set of cloud applications, and there's no unified view of the user. So that's the stage zero, and that's pretty much what defines the fragmented identity. Then there is stage one. All right, there's also some statistic and information there. So there's 65% of security leaders have surveyed that unified user directory across all apps on-premise. They do not have it across on-premise and cloud. So there's no unified way of logging into your on-premise as well as cloud application. The second stage is a bit more mature. So in this scenario, you have a little bit of infrastructure so that you can do a single sign-on across for employees, contractors, and partners across your on-premises application, as well as your cloud applications that you leverage across for typically doing your day-to-day tasks. You also have modern multi-factor authentication. So there are different multi-factor authentications that you can leverage. There's Google Authenticator, there is Duo, there is FIDO, there is Okta Verify. And then you can also define policies or high-level policies across for your apps and servers in order to manage access across these resources. Okta can definitely help with this stage. So we have SSO and MFA, which can be leveraged for essentially for managing single sign-on across for employees, contractors, partners. You can also define policies, and you can create groups which can help you to manage permissions across these resources as well. Besides this, you can definitely double it up with multi-factor authentication. As mentioned, you have Google Authenticator, we have Okta Verify, which can be leveraged, or FIDO 2.0. Depending on your organization requirements, you can leverage that. This is actually, the stage one is actually the #1 priority for organizations in the coming year. 49% of organizations plan to implement MFA. And in addition to this, there is still some kind of integration limitation in terms of SSO, where only 65% have leveraged SSO for employees, but 16% have and not leveraged it for like external users. And only 16% have external users like partners or contractors, even they have SSO capabilities. Stage two, again, is based on the contextual based access. So this is pretty much where we'll go over the static and dynamic context, where you have a user resource. So you can evaluate which policy to leverage based on the type of user who's logging in. Is he logging in from the same exact machine, device, network? Then go ahead and provide a response with either like passwordless authentication or no need of an MFA unless it's requires for a more secure authentication. Besides this, you can also have scenarios where you can have a life cycle managed across for a user. So if you have a scenario where a user joins an organization and if he moves to another position, so let's say he moves from sales to marketing, you want to update his profile to update all of the downstream applications that the user is tied to. Besides this, if this user decides to leave the organization, you want to make sure that his users or his access permissions are revoked across your resources on the 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. on the day he leaves. Besides this, you also want to make sure your public and private APIs are secure. Yep. So 18% of organizations have fully automated provisioning and deprovisioning mechanism for employees. Only 7% have provisioning, deprovisioning for external users. So if an external user is leaving your organization, you're pretty much manually going in and removing that user. Besides this, the stage 3 is essentially the final stage of zero trust maturity curve. This is pretty much where you have authentication and authorization requests managed for the level of risk that is coming in. So let's assume if there is a high risk authentication that occurs, you can pair it with passwordless authentication, as well as you can verify if you would like to provide another stricter MFA. So you have policies defined so that the main goal here is to keep it frictionless when required, but also secure when required. So for example, if you have a high risk login that is coming in, you have a stricter policy defined for that. If this is a low risk authentication, if it's literally from the same user, same device, and same machine, then you don't really want to provide friction across for that specific authentication. So you have more intelligent logins defined, and you're way ahead in the maturity curve when it comes to risk-based access policies. But that was essentially the last stage. And the goal of this stage is essentially to provide frictionless authentication. And 8% have actually implemented passwordless authentication. So Okta also provides passwordless authentication and risk-based access policies based on the threat insight that we have, as well as we can breathe in information from CrowdStrike, MDM devices, and then build your policy and create policy scores based for each and every login risk that is coming in. Just to summarize the what we have went through so far is the main principle of zero trust is essentially never trust, always verify. Modern security essentially requires architecture transformation, so you have to do it in stages. Moving away from network perimeter to identity as a perimeter, as well as securing identity is key for unlocking zero trust. Besides that, we also covered that through these stages, you're making sure that right people have right level of access across right resources in the right context that is assessed continuously. So each and every access request is assessed continuously in this specific scenario. So that was essentially a quick overview. If you go on Okta Zero Trust Assessment, you can actually take this assessment for your organization to see where you are exactly in your maturity curve for your organization. So this survey is something, or this assessment tool is something that is available on our website. So you can pretty much go ahead and access it. This is actually the link for the website. So you can pretty much go in and take this assessment and evaluate where your organization stands. All right, so that was pretty much all I had for today's presentation. Any questions